This is the Writers Podcast, a Writers After Dark radio production, bringing you the best in writing advice, news, trends, and interviews. Hosted by award-winning authors S.K. Anthony and Raymond Esposito.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us again on the Writers Podcast. I'm S.K. Anthony, and I'm here in the studio with my co-host, that big shot author, Raymond Esposito.
Yeah.
And tonight, we're discussing creating emotions in stories.
We are, and every writer, I believe, wants to write that great story, the kind that readers love, the type of iconic tale that becomes a part of the conversation, if not the culture.
And the way to do that is through emotions. The thing that makes a story unique, the thing that drives you to write with passion, is the emotional charge you bring to the story.
Yeah, sometimes that's sadness or joy, sometimes it's love or tragedy, sometimes it's fear, and sometimes it's happiness.
Right. And if you were to rank them in terms of difficulty, creating true sadness or true fear are probably the most challenging, which is why I don't understand how you do that book after book and short story after short story, Raymond. The fear thing, and you nail it.
Because it's my own fear. I just write about the stuff that I'm afraid of.
That's you're afraid of all those creepy things?
Listen, I don't walk past our laundry room is between my office and the bedroom, and it has this little creepy hatch door like from Paranormal Activity that goes into the attic. I go past that door at night and I don't look because I just assume there's something hanging out of that hatch looking at me.
Okay, so it's not weird that when I'm coming up from the basement, when I turn the light off, I run up, right? Like, even at this age.
No, it's not. I wrote a story called Run Up the Stairs, and it's exactly about that universal experience. If you're not running up the stairs in the dark, then you're probably going to die in the next horror movie.
Exactly. Well, that's fair. But, certainly a comedian would argue against the idea that fear is challenging to write. But at least in writing, making a reader cry or giving them nightmares is harder than making people laugh.
I agree. Embedding these real emotions in a story is probably the most challenging task a writer faces. And if you pick through the thousands of writing advice books and articles, you'll find a lot of information on grammar, style, mechanics, plots, characters. But on the topic of emotions, the advice is often brief or somewhat vague.
Oh, goodness. In fact, just trying to create an episode on emotions had Raymond and me at each other's throats. Emotions really ran hot here, to say the least.
Yeah, well, your Spanish anger and passion coupled with my Italian passion and anger. Yeah, and it's not just that we have different approaches to the topic.
But no, I think we were just very committed to this topic. We tested it out on each other's in form of annoyance and snark.
Yeah, hey, listen, I got all the anger I needed. Frustration, tears.
Exactly. So believe us, when we continue discussing this topic, we just experienced it.
Yeah. We're going to say a lot of things the other person doesn't necessarily agree with. But, it's not just our different approaches to the topic. When it comes to any writing topic, we're just different. I'm theory and SK is practice. But it was more than that. On emotions, there are basic guidelines and do's and don'ts, but there just aren't any hard and fast rules about creating them.
But there are things you can employ and things you can try. But in the end, embedding emotions successfully, that is writing something that the reader feels, is a combination of so many writing factors.
And even if you can't name the thing specifically, when an author nails it, you just know because you feel it. The story and the characters, they just resonate. They resonate the way this vodka drink resonates.
I'm right here with you.
Mm-hmm.
For most successful writers, their ability to convey stories that evoke an emotional response comes from a foundation built on their own emotional experiences.
Yes, for example, Anne Rice, she had a few tragedies in her life, the loss of her daughter, the loss of her husband, and these emotions are felt in her work. Edgar Allan Poe, he couldn't love someone who didn't die, and his work was driven by that loss and a healthy appetite for liquor. Stephen King struggled with his own demons and addictions, and Franz Kafka's The Trial is often considered a story about his physical struggle with tuberculosis.
But a writer doesn't necessarily have to be broken or have lived some dark and tragic
I
past.
really wish I could be that cool.
Don't we
I
all?
can't be mysterious because I just talk too much. I am the king of
Yeah, I'm not going to
TMI.
argue with that. That is true. But but anyway, so the writer doesn't need to have that tragic past, but they must have the ability to draw from the readers an authentic emotional response. In other words, the emotions must be real, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if it's not real to the author, it won't seem real to the characters, and consequently, it will be a hollow experience for the reader.
And that's a great theory, but the question always is what makes the emotions real to the reader? How is it that we can cry with a fictional character or laugh with them or even share in their fear? Well, it starts with the writer's personal emotional experiences. You just can't draw from someone else's. You can't fake this kind of thing. Something about each of those characters' emotions, they must first have belonged to the writer.
If you're copying a popular author's storyline, you'll never get through that novel unless you can make it your own. And the most personal thing you can bring, the one that will connect with your reader, is of course real and experienced emotions.
True. When my eldest son went off to college, I was very happy for him, but also I was a little sad to see him leave. It felt like a loss to me. Rationally, I knew it wasn't. I mean, he wasn't gone. He was just a couple hours away, and and he was pursuing his dreams, so that was something to feel good about. But driving home on the day I dropped him off, I fully understood and fully felt what is meant by bittersweet sadness. And it was that feeling I used to write a short story called Reflections. I drew upon that experience to imagine a father's struggle to understand if he was being held captive by an evil presence or if his son's absence was the cause of his sorrow and a sorrow that was propelling him downward into insanity. The plot for me was secondary to my remembering that awful sadness that had sat next to me on the car ride home.
That story reflections was pretty creepy. That came from your sorrow?
Mm-hmm.
All right, you keep going with dark vision on her. I like it. I like it.
You have to be sad
you
to
know,
write it.
but as a reader, I found that unless you inject your characters with emotions, the story just doesn't work, even if the structure does. So basically, without emotional characters, you're just writing events.
And mastering the craft means mastering the subtleties of revealing a character. And a big part of the reader's discovery is the emotional range and the experience of that character.
That makes me think the only stories that have given me the gift of my own tears are the ones that have made a connection straight to my heart. And these are the stories that stay with me and will do the same for you, for your reader. The thing is, if they cry, they buy. It's the deep emotions that solidify stories and grants them that brilliant realism.
I think the writer's challenge is that thoughts and feelings are different aspects of the human experience. And how we think about someone isn't as powerful as how we feel about them. And if you've ever
Yeah.
had a broken heart, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's the battle between thoughts and feelings, the conflict between knowing something and feeling something is such a universal experience that the writer must make both true for the reader.
Yeah, you can think of it as the original show versus tell. Rational thoughts are the telling, but emotions are the showing. And success at exposing the subtle differences between the two is what separates good stories from really great stories.
Yeah, but penning emotions isn't a simple or straightforward process either. It's not something that offers a direct measurement like proper grammar or the proper creation of a complex sentence. That's straightforward. Emotions just is it's a wild card.
Right, you can capture an incredible thought in a single line, but emotions are the thing where the sum of the parts are greater than the whole. It's like a beautiful day and all the components that come together for it to be deemed such.
Yeah, because sharing a character's thoughts is easy. You can even share their emotional states with simple lines, such as "she was sad" or "he was hostile." And that tells the readers about the experience, but it doesn't let them experience the experience.
Right, because readers understand those stock emotions. They know what you mean when you tell them how a character feels. But again, that is knowing something, it's not feeling something. So it's not enough to simply tell them, you have to show them.
So, how do we do it? How do we even begin to create emotional experiences that touch the reader at a deeper level than just knowing?
I'll have them create a podcast episode on emotions with SK Anthony. That'll touch their emotions.
Yeah, listen, if you wanna if you wanna avoid jail, don't start a podcast with Raymond Esposito. But anyway, as we began, it starts with the writer's ability to reflect on their own emotions. Because before we can get to the mechanics, we need first to set out a strong foundation upon which we write from.
So to build an emotion beyond just naming it, the author needs some point of reference. That is, we need to draw the emotion from a personal emotional experience from our past.
For example, we may never have lost a husband or a wife, son or daughter, but we all have experienced loss. We can use that feeling to create the same as it applies to our stories. Hemingway's famous 6-word story is an excellent example. For sale, baby shoes, never worn.
You don't need to have lost a child or experienced infertility to feel the sadness in those 6 words.
When your characters feel devastated and you have tears in your eyes, your own gut will tell you that you got this right. This is when characters take on a life of their own and create their own emotions. The ones that belong to the character becoming his and hers so thoroughly, the reader can't imagine them any other way.
But discovering that emotion is just half the task. A writer must face the emotional experience with honesty. The more powerful our own emotional experience is, the more apprehensive we are to write honestly about it. It's a level of exposure of honesty that can make the writer fear judgment.
Yeah, I fear judgment all the time. I don't know about you. But to write emotional stories or scenes requires the writer's willingness to demonstrate, to write about even the most conflicting or embarrassing emotions.
When I was a kid, for example, I struggled with my weight. And although I always put on a confident game face and pretended it didn't bother me, the truth was I felt a little ashamed about it. I used that in a story called The Dead Lie. The kid in the story is my story, or at least my emotional story. To write it, I had to be completely honest about how I felt growing up as the fat kid. It wasn't an easy thing to face.
Well, I'm sorry that it wasn't easy for you, but I do have to say that, that story, The Dead Lie, is probably my favorite short story of yours.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. But that's why emotional honesty is important.
Mm-hmm.
When evoking any emotion, honesty is a huge factor in resonating with readers. Digging deep, risking being vulnerable, and having the courage to be honest can make the reader feel understood and connected to this flawed character.
Because this level of honesty has to make its way into our characters. For a writer to make effective stories, one where the good emotions don't just belong to the hero and the bad emotions to the villain, we need to approach emotions without judgment.
Yes, but of course we have to pick and choose, right? I think as far as heroes and villains goes, readers will love heroes and hate villains. But if you can work some kind of ambiguous balance into the story, like the hero not being a saint and the villain not being only evil, the story will be much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
As the writer, it might be a good idea to think of your novel as not having protagonist and antagonist at all, but more as characters with conflicting goals.
And on the other hand, writers so often make the error of writing these perfect characters or damaged in such a perfect way that they become honorable but perhaps not necessarily realistic. The challenge is, of course, that we suffer emotional bias in much the same way we suffer cognitive bias. Even though we know it's not true, we like to see the world as a place where good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people.
I like that. I think that is how the world should
Yeah,
work.
it's called Just World, and it's just not true.
But it's true, right? It's easy to say that the guy is a jerk and the girl shouldn't love him, for example. Or to criticize the person who runs toward the screams when a psychopath is on the loose. But the other has to be the objective narrator.
Mm-hmm.
They need the ability to be able to flip these emotions, no?
Yeah, they have to imagine them with different reactions or with a different outcome. The feeling of winning that becomes a loss, or the close call in our own life that becomes a tragedy. It's the power of what if. And
Oh, yeah, what if?
we're actually pretty good as writers at imagining these different outcomes. I mean, that's our job. But this isn't just about plot. This is emotion. Turning sadness into happiness, or fear into bravery, or peace into anger, or flipping those things are critical to the craft.
Right. When you're in that scene, like when you're in that moment, give your character an out of character moment to go along with it. Like don't limit your characters to, to the same set of behaviors. If you have a character, for example, who's always a bitch, maybe she gets really quiet when her father is around. This can add an extra layer and make you question what's her emotional conflict with her dad. And this is what makes characters interesting. They're like the rest of us. We all have unexpected reactions and behaviors depending on the situation or a person.
Exactly, because those out of character moments are more true to the human experience. None of us are consistent in our emotional responses. None of us are immune from impure thoughts or less than honorable actions. Our characters should demonstrate that roller coaster emotion that is true to the actual human experience.
And we need to decide what level of emotional honesty we want to reveal in our characters.
Yeah, for example, I'll tell you a story. A few years back, my wife was in a bad car accident. She was sideswiped by another vehicle and they rushed her to the hospital. And I can still see her in that ER, strapped to a board, head and neck braced, her total look of disorientation and pain. And you can imagine how worried I was and how powerless I felt to help her. But those weren't my only emotions. You see, on that terrible day, she was also driving my brand new, waited through 20 years and 5 kids to buy, very pretty Mercedes Benz. So Raymond, the good and loving husband, felt deeply for his wife's suffering, and Raymond, the oh my God, you fucked up my new car guy, was also very pissed and close and close to whispering to his stricken wife, "You see, this is why we can't have nice things."
Right, okay. But this makes you a prime example that, that human beings are naturally conflicted in the emotions department. So why not translate that reality to your characters? But now you can't leave it hanging. Did you like ever tell her, you know, that roller coaster of emotions you experienced?
Yeah, but I mean, much later, I didn't, want to say it that day in the hospital. I
Well,
did wait.
well, well, at least you had the decency,
I knew I
okay?
would use it sooner or later, so I had to tell her the truth. She didn't necessarily disagree with me. She loves that car more than I do. But that was my firsthand experience, and those emotions are easy because I experienced them. But I do believe you can also write with honest emotions, even on things you've never personally experienced.
Yeah, which is, why research is one of the most crucial steps in pulling this off. For example, if you were writing a novel about a single mother who deals with a drug addiction, you need to understand both the experiences of being a single mother and the experience of addiction. So you would go on and research that.
Yeah, and if you're writing about a despondent Mercedes owner, you have to understand what it feels like to own that fine German engineering dream car. You know, there's a great meme out there, and it says, when a woman is in labor, she comes close to understanding the pain a man experiences when he has the flu. Now,
Poor guy. Oh my
it's funny
goodness.
because it does two things. First, it demonstrates that men have absolutely no clue how painful childbirth is. But second, it shows how perspective creates emotional response and how emotional responses can affect perspective.
Yeah, that's true. Because, creating honest emotions is one part experience, one part research, and one part imagination. As writers, that is our job to accurately imagine the things we will never experience.
And research is
In your case, I really hope you never experience those things. In my case, I kind of wished because I write superhero
I don't want to experience
powers.
childbirth or the flu. But research is the way to find those baseline actions of what a character in a set of experience would do, why they would do it, when, and how they might do it.
And if you can do really deep, detailed analysis of their actions, facial expressions, quirks, twitches, taglines, and traits, then you'll know when to put them in, and the reader won't need any explanation on what they're possibly feeling. Ask yourself, what characters, actions, and themes affect you most strongly? What are the books and movies that have left the greatest impact on you? And what about them did you find particularly moving? You got to think about this when you're trying to convey your own emotions in your stories.
Sure. An emotional investment is the thing that gets a reader involved. And to achieve it requires a reader's empathy for our characters. Empathy, it's not the same as sympathy. Sympathy is the telling, and empathy is the showing. To understand that, we can look at the differences between the two.
You're right. Sympathy is compassion. or sorrow for the hardships of another. It's when we think, I can understand what they must feel. In other words, it's a thought, a rational understanding of another's experience. Empathy, on the other hand, is when we, to use an idiom, can put ourselves in their shoes. That is, we can feel what another is feeling. So I kind of wish I could have you walk in my shoes.
No thanks. Think of the difference this way. If you've ever seen the movies Jaws, Open Water, or the USS Indianapolis, you can sympathize with the character's fear of sharks. Now imagine watching those movies while standing chest deep in the ocean. That second feeling would inspire much more empathy for their plight. This is what allows the reader to experience empathy for the characters because they can relate. They experience recognition in the work. When you see yourself or someone familiar to you in a character or in a situation you've experienced, there's almost an instant connection.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like meeting a stranger and knowing right away that you're going to be friends, or the opposite. You can recognize a spider as a mortal enemy.
Oh, you should recognize the spider as a mortal. They are
Listen,
our mortal.
they're out to get me.
Yeah.
But and you meet them and you know immediately that you're definitely never ever going to be friends. But you have that familiar feeling. And the reason that works is because some experiences are universal and recognition of them can create a bond. There's comfort in knowing that you felt the character's feelings too. I mean, who hasn't faced a tough decision between what's right and what's wrong? And who hasn't told a lie to spare someone's feelings?
And that's the first key to achieving empathy. First, we can empathize with situations that are similar to ones we've experienced. To use another example, think about cancer. You can certainly sympathize with someone who has it or lost someone to it, but unless you're a cancer survivor, you can't really know what that feels like.
No, you're right. But you can create those feelings by drawing on your own personal loss. It's not how the loss occurred, it's the feelings of the loss that are important that for you to draw on.
The second and most important requirement in that is the connection to the character. Whether the feeling we're looking to create is sadness, fear, happiness, or frustration, we can only empathize with those that we actually feel a connection to.
Again, we can certainly sympathize with strangers, but it's only when we have a relationship, an understanding of the person as a whole, that we can fully empathize with their situation. So with that in mind, to make the readers care, they need to care about the motivation and goals of your character, whether they win or lose, succeed or fail, live or die. The readers need to relate to your character's core desires.
What's so interesting about it is the understanding or the relationship doesn't require we like the person or character. Take, for example, Snape from Harry Potter. Here's a character that seems a bit evil, and he certainly appears mean to poor Harry. But as his backgrounds and his motivations unfold, we start to see both him and his interactions with Harry in a much different way. At the end, we don't need to agree with his methods, but we can feel his conflict, his loneliness, and his loss. In other words, we can empathize with a character that we once disliked.
Always. Sorry, I just always have to say always.
Now we love him.
With my Snape. But Snape's the perfect example of self-sacrifice, which every now and then can be extremely powerful. So I would say to keep that in mind for your stories. When characters make that hard right choice, when they deliberately surrender their own happiness or even their very lives for the sake of someone else or a greater cause, nothing moves me personally more deeply. Making characters suffer is one thing. Making them choose to suffer because it's the right thing to do is another thing altogether.
Yeah, I think it's powerful when we don't agree with a character's choices, but we understand why they're making them.
Right.
Much like the show Don't Tell rule, perspective is an important aspect of emotional empathy. The reader needs enough of the character's perspective so we can understand the character and feel how they must feel, if not feel it for ourselves.
And once we have the foundation of emotional experiences, honesty, perspective, and research, we then need to use our writing craft to translate it all onto the page.
Making fictional emotions feel real to the reader requires a lot of work, and there just aren't any shortcuts to achieving such mastery. It's the interplay of words, of character development, and of allowing the reader to identify their own emotional experience within the character's emotional journey, that's what works.
Yeah, and although each author will go about the process and choose the emotions as they see fit, there are some basic mechanical guidelines we can use to help the task.
Certainly. And humans have a wide emotional range, but there are only 8 core emotions: happy, sad, anger, fear, contempt, disgust, surprise, and suspicion. And humans are very adept at recognizing each with great accuracy on just sight alone. In multiple studies across multiple cultures, participants have been shown images of the 8 core emotions. With great consistency, participants accurately guess the correct emotion in the image, even when that image is just a cartoon. So, recognizing emotional expressions is a biological ability that most people possess.
But in writing, we're not just identifying emotions, we're using words to create them. To elicit empathy, the writer must share the character's experience in such a way that the reader can both understand why they feel the way they do and care enough about the character to empathize with them.
This classic advice of show, don't tell is most critical when writing emotions into a story. He was sad just isn't enough. We need to show his pain, his anguish. We need to build it up so the reader knows what's at stake, what was lost or what was gained, and they actually care about the character. Don't name the emotion, but describe in detail and with lots of concrete images a specific instance when you observe that emotion in another person.
For example, imagine there's a half-broken table in the cafeteria at a high school. Every day at fourth period lunch, a girl sits there by herself even though it's broken. She tends to keep her head down, and every so often, she pushes her glasses so they sit at the top of her nose. But as gravity goes, they keep sliding down. After a look around the room, she opens her brown bag and eats her lunch quietly. This girl never smiles, but in class, when the teacher calls her name and she answers, peeking out from the hair covering her face, you'll see thick braces shining through. Then at the end of the day, she always waits for the school bus at the back of the line. There, she pulls and tugs at the bottom of her shirt, attempting to hide her chubby frame. Every day, she follows the same routine. Until one day, when the half-broken table is empty. Until one day, when no one tucks her shirts at the end of the bus line. Until one day, when the teacher doesn't call her name. But it doesn't matter, because no one noticed.
What I love about that short piece is, first, I understand completely what it's like to pull at your clothes. But more importantly, there's no reason to title it The Lonely Girl because you can feel it. It's all there. It's the smallest descriptions that tell that story. Head down, broken table, never smiles, peeking out, no one noticed.
Yeah, it was an autobiography
Mm.
of sorts. Anyway, another powerful way to show and not tell is to use metaphors over similes. The simile with the use of like or as can also slow and impede the evocation of the emotion. Metaphors, however, can give a better picture of the two objects you compare.
Another great technique is body language, expressing and not telling through the character's movements. Don't forget to match your character's physical appearance as an expression of how they're feeling. If your character is depressed, then she would show signs like not combing her hair, not eating, losing weight, or perhaps having dark circles under her eyes. Using physical characteristics to reflect those inner emotions will remind the readers of your character's emotional state.
Yeah, and also playing with all 5 senses. To keep your readers involved, put them in the scene emotionally. What can the reader hear and smell? What does it mean for the character and the reader when everything goes silent? Or what does it mean when they can hear the drum of their own heartbeats? Or even, if they turn a doorknob and see blood on their hand, what do they smell? What do they feel? What's their initial reaction when they feel that wetness? There's an article on using the 5 senses on Writers After Dark. I think it's worth checking out.
One of my favorite techniques, and that might be related to my genre, is to use pace, moving a story faster or slower to create a mood. If you breathe like another person, then you know what they're feeling, and your story should breathe with and for the reader.
No, I'm with you. I really like the play of tempo. I keep practicing. I'm not good at it yet. You're very good at that. but I really love the playing around with the tempo. It really makes a difference. In some scenes, I do have it where I feel, okay, I got it, but most of the times I struggle with it. But it's a good practice.
Just to elaborate on how do you do pace, it's that intertwine of short, rapid sentences and then longer sentences.
But yeah, and speaking of tempo, don't forget to slow it down also. When you have a very emotional scene, slow it down. Let us hear your character's every thought, highlight a few details, and show the actions. Also, make sure that you use the active voice and not the passive voice. We want the character to do the action. This is going to draw us into the emotions.
For new writers, the quest to express character emotions often results in one or both of two mistakes. The first is the sentimental mistake, and the second is the melodramatic error.
The sentimental mistake is a tell instead of a show error. It's when we try to shortcut the emotional expression through any of the stuck emotions. For example, killing a puppy or announcing the death of a loved one. Think about the movie The Notebook. Readers
I cried
and
just
movie
thinking about it.
viewers, you never even saw it. You avoid it. So, but readers and movie viewers, they wouldn't have cried had they just been told, oh, this guy really loved his wife who got Alzheimer's and died. Sure, that's sad. We know that. But people die every day. And, it's playing on that universal sadness. It's just simply training on the stack emotions 96% of the population feels. But, taking you through that journey of how Nicholas Sparks did, that was fantastic.
I heard. I had a room full of crying women. In Pet Sematary, Stephen King starts with the stock emotion, the death of a child, but then he builds upon that loss. We understand the character's ill-fated desperation to bring back the child and the conflicting emotions between what's right and what's the cost of being right. And finally, he gives us the experience of that utter horror upon the child's return from the grave.
And the melodramatic mistake is somewhat different, although it may have a sentimental element to it. Through this mistake, a writer uses overdramatic descriptions or dialogue, or what we may call purple prose. When you start using flowery words to describe the emotional scene, you know it's melodramatic, right? And the problem is the words muddle up the emotion and it distances us from the scene.
And it doesn't even have to be an entire paragraph. Just the slightest melodrama can ruin the entire feel of a scene. Here's an example from a book ad that I recently read. Close your eyes and relax. Tonight, it's all about your pleasure. His sexy voice crooned next to my ear. That one odd word, crooned, is the right meaning. It means soft, low, and sentimental in sound, but it seems out of place. Now imagine the same scene with a different approach. Close your eyes and relax. Tonight, it's all about your pleasure. His lips softly brushed my ear as he whispered. His breath felt warm and impatient.
Somebody turn the AC. Well, the answers to avoiding sentimental statements or melodramatic prose is to choose the right words, as Rima just did.
Don't use crooned or crooned.
Maybe it's just the vodka, but I think he just used the right words. Anyway, it's important to recognize that word choice can greatly affect readers' emotions. Some words are triggers and can be used to set off the reader. Some words convey humor or passion. Other words elicit anger, and others do nothing. Choose your words with their impact potential in mind. Use sharp words for the harsher emotions, soft-sounding and soft-meaning words for gentle emotions.
But even common actions can be influenced by word choice. Does your character race across town, or does he just sit in traffic with no concern? Does he demand something, or does he simply ask for something? Does he lift? Does he haul? Or does he simply pick up an object?
Yes, which is why it's important to be aware of your word choices and what they can do to the scene and the overall tone of the story. Are you increasing tension because you chose the right word combination? Or are you diffusing tension because you've used fluffy words in the dark scene?
The bottom line is we intuitively know what makes a great story. They're the ones where the characters jump from the page and become real to us.
Yeah, and we all want to feel understood and connected. As authors, it's our job to offer that emotional connection to readers through our characters as best we can. So we'll leave you with this quote by Stephen King.
You cannot hope to sweep someone else away by the force of your writing until it has been done to you.
Thank you for listening to the Writers Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more articles, news and advice, visit our website, writersafterdark.net, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Writers Podcast is a Writers After Dark radio production. Executive producers SK Anthony and Raymond Esposito. Copyright 2017.